Well, welcome everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the September 24th Family Partnership Council meeting. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. I know it's raining in different parts of the state and we're kind of scattered across the state. So I do appreciate your time and your thoughtful questions and input as we go through each council meeting. I have gotten to really enjoy our conversations and I learn a lot from the questions that you ask. And as I was sharing with the presenters just prior to, I learned a lot from the presentations as well. So I'm really looking forward to our presenters today and your discussion and your questions that come out of that. And hopefully we can all learn together. I do want to say welcome. We do have 2 new members with us today. I don't quite see them yet on my screen, but we welcome Liz Delaney and Stephanie Barker to the Family Partnership Council. So thank you very much for joining us. And I just want to remind you that our purpose, and I'll read it so I don't misspeak, the purpose of the council is that the council serves as an advisory role to the Kentucky Department of Education and provides input regarding topics of interest to families, such as ways that families and communities can assist schools in ensuring that the achievement level of all students is increased. So again, I appreciate each of you coming in with that purpose to guide us through. So advisory councils, just a reminder, just ensure that your video is streaming and that you are visible during the duration of the meeting. Your microphone should be muted when you are not speaking. However, any discussions must be available to the public. So make certain that your mic is unmuted when you are speaking or asking a question. And so at this time, I'm going to turn to Leslie Spears for roll call. Oh, and there's Stephanie. We just welcomed her.
Okay, roll call. I've got Marcia Van Hook.
Present.
Laura Beard. Laura, you're on mute.
Present.
Great. Brittany Faulkner. Ashley Bruce. Tara Tricor.
Present.
Leah Markham.
Present.
Amy Nickerson.
Present.
Alicia Miller. Liz Delaney. Melissa Goins.
Here.
Stephanie Barker.
Present.
Rhonda Logsdon.
I hope all is well.
Great. Erin Weaver.
I'm here.
Great. Chris Medley. Going to pass it back to you, Marcia.
Thank you, Leslie. And at this time, I will call for approval of the June 18th minute meetings. Just to remind you each that they were sent to you via the invite, and I believe that they're in the chat. So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to look at those, and I'll call for approval in just a few minutes. Looks like most of you have read them already from what I can see, and I see some heads nodding. So I will go ahead and call for a motion to approve the June 18th minute meeting. The meeting minutes. I'll get that out.
I so move. Erin Weaver.
Thank you. May I have a second?
I so move. Tara Trucor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. So the minutes are approved. I'm going to scan real quick. I don't believe that I see the commissioner online with us. I know that it's just going to make sure. Actually, he is attending the Continuous Improvement Summit that is there in Lexington today, and he hopes to join us on the November 16th meeting. So just that's been a wonderful opportunity. I was there yesterday. There were great presenters and a lot to learn and share. And there were a lot of discussions around including families and communities into the work. So I was really glad to hear that. I do believe I heard more of that yesterday at the summit than I have heard in years past. So I just wanted to share that. That was very, very hopeful. And I was glad to see a lot of the work that was ongoing across the state already. So I'm going to go ahead and move into our presenters. And I want to thank all of you for your topics that you send in to us so that we really do make these meetings meaningful for you. And I know I've said that before, but I want to say it again. It really does help this become purposeful for us in our work in sharing information with you from various speakers. So I do want to say again, if there's something you want to hear from us, just make sure that you get your topic to us and we'll do some research and get a speaker for you. But we're going to start out with a topic that we have had before, which is chronic absenteeism. And we're going to hear from Dr. Judy Vanderhaar and Christina Watford from the Division of Student Success. So I think it's a little bit more than what we have heard in the past. If you give me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen and I will drive the presentation today. Let me share. Oops. Let me do. I'm going to say this. I've said it to some others. I have a new second monitor and it's challenging me sometimes. So here we go. Let's do share this way. Let's do this. Here we go. And I think I talked us through the first few slides. So here we go. I am ready. Judy, are you ready?
I am. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. We're happy to be here with you all again to learn from you and also to share some more in-depth information around chronic absenteeism from our end. So my name is Judy and I work in the Division of Student Success, and I'm here with my colleague, Christina, who will be leading us off talking about Tier 1.
Thank you so much. So I am Christina Watford, and I have been with the Department of Education for right at a year. Just celebrated my 1-year anniversary at the end of August. I joined the Department of Education following a 15-and-a-half-year career as a school counselor. And so I work on the Persistence to Graduation team with Judy and with Florence Chang, who has also presented on chronic absenteeism to you all before as well. So thank you all so much for letting us come and talk with you again. We are going to look at some tiered approaches and strategies. We will also focus on some data tools that are available around attendance and chronic absenteeism, and then look at some services that are potentially available to families, and we'll kind of explain the potential here in just a little bit whenever we get to that. So if you want to go to the next slide. So previously, Judy and Florence have introduced not only barriers to that students face around attendance, but also some strategies that schools can implement to help encourage good attendance. So for today's meeting, what we want to do is to take just a little while to review those strategies that they have shared with you in the past for the benefit of members who maybe were not able to be here, but also because we want to reframe those within the MTSS tiers. And so what has been shared previously would be Tier 1 interventions, and these are pieces that create a sense of belonging and safety and help to create connection for families and for students as well as for staff. All of this just helps us to think about how it fits into our MTSS tiers. And then Judy is going to follow up with some Tier 2 interventions that will look at how we can remove barriers for students who miss 10 to 20% of the school day, the school time rather, and then looking at some intensive interventions and system of care pieces in the Tier 3 piece for those students who are in that extreme absenteeism category. And that means that they have missed more than the 20% of the school year. So if you can advance to the next slide for me.
And
I want to start off by just stress. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Christina, excuse me. I just wanted, for people that don't know, MTSS, that stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support.
Thank you for clarifying that. So I do want to say that I am going to talk a lot about relationship and just how important it is to really all of these tiered intervention pieces. And, you know, whenever we get to the potential services that students and parents would have access to, because relationship is really the foundation of everything that we do inside of a school. This includes all of the acceptable practices or things that we accept in our building, in terms of practices and behaviors that go into building what we call the school culture. And then that feeds into the climate, which is what do people experience and feel whenever they walk into our building. So when we talk about communication, we have to think about what the culture and the climate is of each building, because that's going to dictate how any district or school level messaging around attendance and those attendance campaigns that they have talked with you all about before, how they're perceived by families as well as by the community. And then, you know, that goes a long way into really driving home for students how important it is for them to attend school and what they miss when they are not in the building. So last week, I was at the KDPP conference, and Hetty Chang, who works with Attendance Works, was the keynote speaker. And she talked about a common classroom practice with a teacher that she had encountered that, to me, just really kind of highlighted the importance of how relationship feeds into all of the communication strategies that we use are. And she shared the story of a teacher who, every time a student was absent, she would write their name on a heart inside of the classroom. And it was posted for all of the students to see. And at the beginning of the day, they would talk about students who weren't there. They didn't talk about why they weren't there, just that, you know, our friend is not here today. And when they're gone, we want to remember them. And that built a practice in that classroom of students feeling like they were missed and like they were important and they were worthy when somebody was going to take note when they weren't there. And she shared that in that classroom, the culture became that those students did not want to miss, right? Because they understood that they were missed every time that they were not in that classroom. And it really just changed kind of the foundation for that particular classroom around attendance. And she said that students were even at a point where they didn't want to go out on breaks. Like they didn't want to go out on fall break. They didn't want to go out on Christmas break or spring break because they felt like their peers were going to miss them. And it had been instilled in them the importance of expressing when they miss somebody as well. So I just thought that was just a really nice tie into all of this, because that feeds, you know, the culture and the climate that we establish for students and families in our building really carries a lot of weight whenever it comes to the messaging that we send out. If we're sending letters and text messages and emails and holding family nights and asking our teachers to make positive phone calls home, if they are experiencing positive, authentic relationships in our building and they really feel like that they are missed, then those letters and text messages and family nights really carry a lot more weight than if they don't. And then also thinking about, you know, we have a tendency, and, you know, Judy kind of hit on this whenever she stepped back for a minute and she explained to you all what MTSS means. As educators, we a lot of times walk into a conversation and we assume that everybody knows all of the language that we are using. And a lot of times we forget that not everybody is an educator, right? So when we have conversations with families, really remembering that they don't wear the same educator lens that we do, but we have to help them to understand why, from our educator lens, attendance is so important. So now we can go to the next slide. So this is an example of a parent communication text and email system that is being used in Jefferson County. And this tells the student and the parent when an absence has occurred. Not only does it tell them when an absence has occurred, but it also lets them know how many days they have absent. And then it also provides a scale for them to let them know, like on terms of the attendance scale, you're in the perfect category. You know, you've missed 0 days. And then if you miss 1 to 8 days, you kind of fall into that category. We're saying you're still doing a great job. You're still on track. But then whenever we get to like 9 days, there's some valuable instructional time that's being missed based on your attendance. And then we move up into the significant amount of time that's lost, as well as calling to say, hey, we can help. But what I really wanted to point out about this is notice that none of this is talking about truancy. This is just talking about, this is where your attendance is. It addresses any concerns about learning loss, but it addresses it in a very positive manner. And then if you're in a situation where you really feel like you need help from the school, we're telling you we want you to call us and we want you to help us. And so this was just a really good positive strategy around attendance. The parent who shared this with us told us that her particular daughter, when she received this, she didn't like that she was getting ready to cross over from the great into the category where there was some valuable instructional time that was missed. So even for the student, this was a really impactful tool. And she actually kind of turned her attendance around at that point in time. And it became a mission of hers to improve her attendance. We can go to the next slide. So we have already spent some time talking about the importance of building a positive school culture and climate. As educators, we know that students are really intelligent, and if we are, if we're sending out messages and we're not being authentic about those messages, they really can pick up on that. So when we talk about fostering a welcoming and supportive culture for students and for adults, it truly has to mean that we are fostering a welcoming and supporting culture for students and for adults. We can't just pay lip service to it. And this really looks at all of those practices, around like restorative practices, creating and setting up attendance incentives, looking at what our PBIS, which is our positive behavior intervention and support systems, look like. What are the practices that we have in place in the building that say to a student, hey, you are important to us? And then also those opportunities that are available for all of the student groups in our building, so that we're not just highlighting the mainstream student groups, but those marginalized groups as well. And are we making them feel like they belong in our building also? And then we really have to take a few minutes and talk about support for educator well-being. So we are all across the country, we are facing teacher shortages, and Kentucky is no exception to that as well. And so really looking at the pieces that we have in place around how we're taking care of the adults that are in our building are equally as important to what we're doing to make sure that students feel like they belong as well, because our staff needs to feel like they belong also. And so just keeping that in mind. And all of this really feeds into what we call social and emotional learning in the school setting. So the foundation or the framework that we use comes from CASEL. CASEL is not a program, it's just a framework for which all programs should follow whenever it comes to implementing social and emotional learning. And so what we really are wanting to teach students is how to be self-aware, how to how to manage their own self and their own being, how to make responsible decisions, building into relationship skills, and then the social awareness pieces that feed into all of that as well. And so when we're talking about attendance and when we're talking about educating them about the importance of attendance, all of this feeds into that, right? So we're teaching them to be aware of what their attendance looks like. When you wake up on Monday morning and you really, really don't want to go to school, what does it look like from the self-management standpoint of saying, okay, I may not want to do this right now, but I need to do it because this is what's best for me. And then that feeds into the responsible decision making. But if you look at this, this is not only just what we're doing in an isolated or individual classroom. So it doesn't come down to just isolated lessons in one classroom. This is what are we teaching, not only in the classroom, but also what are we teaching school-wide? And then also what are we teaching out in the community? And so attendance is one part of the social and emotional learning aspects that we want schools and we want students to understand and to focus on. And it really ties into all of the other pieces that we're trying to teach them around that as well. And just keep in mind that it's not just the classroom, but it branches out into the school level as well as to what we're teaching in the community as well. So you can go to the next slide. So in Kentucky, when students take the Kentucky Summative Assessment Test each year, not every grade level takes it, but it starts at the 3rd grade and then various grade levels take it each year. There is a survey that is given to them, and that particular survey is the Quality of School Climate and Safety Survey. And it asks students a series of questions about how they feel about school and feel about things that are going on in their building. And one of the questions is, if I have a problem, there is an adult from school that I can talk to. So this particular chart represents the percentage of students in Kentucky at each grade level, elementary, middle, and high school, who said that they disagree. So at the elementary age level, we have 5% of our students who are saying that they do not feel like that they have an adult in the building that they can talk to. The middle school, we have 11%, and at the high school, we have 14%. When I look at this, I always think, you know, doesn't look too terribly bad. 5% of our elementary school students can't possibly be that many students, right? However, if you can tab one more, it's going to show us the numbers. Yeah, it's going to show us the numbers. So when we add all of these up, just from the students who took this test, and remember, not all grade levels take this, or not the test, but the survey, not all grade levels take it. We have over 50,000 students in Kentucky who are telling us that they don't feel like they have an adult in the building. And so that's a signal to us as educators that we have some work to do around building relationships, which we have already talked about several times with our students. So if you'll go to the next slide. One tool that we talk with school districts about and co-ops whenever we go and travel the state, teaching them how to use the early warning tool, and another feature called Insights, which Judy is going to share with you, is something called relationship mapping. And so this actually stems from a Harvard study. And in the original Harvard study, they would have schools who signed up to be a part of the study write the names of every student that's in the building on a piece of paper. And then those sheets of paper line the walls of the school. And before the school year begins, teachers would go and they would put a dot next to every student that they had some sort of relationship with. And the goal behind this was to identify students who had very few dots, meaning they had very few connections with teachers who were in their building, to try and help address that whole issue of whether or not students feel like they have an adult that they can go and that they can talk to. And so at the end of the day, they would gather and collect all of the papers that did not have many dots, and then it becomes a name and claim system, which means that some staff person in the building, whether it's a teacher, administrator, counselor, librarian, school technology person, it could be cafeteria, it could be, you know, janitorial staff, it could be really anyone who is on staff, kind of names and claims that student and says, hey, I know who that kid is. And they say, I'm willing to put in the time and the effort to try and help establish a relationship. A lot of times it takes a lot of work, because we've got some students who know how to push all of the buttons. And so a lot of times as a counselor, it would really take a lot of patience on my part in proving to a student that, hey, other people may have walked away in the past, but I'm not going to. And so what can we do in order to help you while you were at school? So that's the whole purpose behind that. They do have a new way of doing it. So you don't have to just line your walls now. They do have an electronic version of this that schools can use as well. But again, it's just a way for schools to identify students who maybe don't have any connections to anyone in the building. And then, you know, I would also point out, going back to the relationship mapping, that is also a strategy that administrators can use when it comes to their staff. Like, who are the staff in your building that are really connected, and who has relationships with other people in the building? And, you know, what administrator has really worked at intentionally building a relationship with a staff member as well? Because as part of our teacher incentives and recruitment, is it, you know, they feel a sense of belonging as well. So moving on. So when we look at making learning relevant and meaningful, we really need to help students see that there is some connection to the real world, and that, you know, we are helping them to approach education not only from, you know, not only from an age-appropriate lens and what is meaningful and what is relevant to them as they progress and as they move through the education system, but also looking at the cultural relevance. And so again, making sure that all of our student groups feel like what's being taught to them is relevant to them from their cultural perspective as well. And then looking at the feedback that we're providing to students. So how often does that take place? And is it viewed as meaningful feedback, something that they can take and do something with rather than just a grade on a paper or a score on an exam? And then, Kentucky is doing a lot of work right now around looking at our assessment system and making sure that our assessments fit into that meaningful feedback category, right? And that when students sit down to take a test, it means something to them. And so there will be more information that comes out just about what the assessment system looks like across the state of Kentucky, but then also looking at classroom assessments as well, and making sure that, what we are asking students to learn and what we expect them to know and to be able to give back to us on a test is relevant for what they need to know in this particular day and time. And then looking at addressing some of the external barriers that students face. So when Judy and Florence have presented in the past, I know that they have talked with you all about some of these pieces as well, but really looking at school-based mental health services, physical health services, dental services, that maybe by building partnerships with the public health department, we can bring into the school to try and help reduce some of those barriers. I've seen, quite a bit of information coming out recently about new programs that school systems are developing around those services. And then also potentially looking at telehealth services, in schools without a full-time nurse, and whether or not that's an option to help to provide some consultative services in the school building as well. And when we talk about transportation, so I know in the past, just talking about whether or not students feel safe and how they get to school. There are schools that are using parents and other volunteer staff, or even hiring some staff members to provide supervision at bus stops and on walks to school, putting bus monitors on buses to make sure that students feel a sense of safety, to reduce the likelihood that not feeling safe is one of those barriers that they are faced with. But not only that, but also looking at, if a student misses the bus for whatever reason, maybe they overslept, maybe, maybe they had stuff going on in their family, getting parents picked up from work and, back home to take care of younger children. There's so many different things that our students are faced with that, helping them to address how they can get to school if they miss the bus can be critical whenever it comes to addressing attendance. And so there are some, places that are partnering with public transit sources in order to provide additional transportation options besides just the bus if a student misses for whatever reason. We have also seen a couple of articles here recently around schools who are looking at their eating policies in school. Instead of, it's always traditionally been that students can only eat at lunchtime, or they can only eat at breakfast and at lunchtime. But if food is a way to get students to come to school because they know that there are going to be snacks available, that they're going to be able to eat breakfast, even if they miss the bus and they get there late, or, just whatever their needs are around food. Maybe it's sending them home with a backpack of food, or, whatever the case may be, but really looking at how we can reduce food as a barrier for students coming to school, and, making sure that that's something that they have to look forward to. And for a lot of our students, that's the reason that they do come to school, is because they know that that's going to be the one place that they get a steady meal. We have also worked with schools who are providing laundry services and clothing closets. So I know last year I was working with an alternative education program, and one of the things that they did was they provided washer and dryer for students. And when they came to school, if they needed to wash and dry their clothes because they couldn't do that at home, then they allowed them to do that. It just became a part of the regular school routine that students would bring their laundry in and would take care of all of that. Because again, if that's an area of struggle for you and something that keeps you away from school, if we can reduce that as a barrier, then it can help whenever it comes to absenteeism. So, and I think, yes. So Judy, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
Well, it's so dark here, but that's okay. I'm going to kind of fly through some of this for time's sake. I have a video that I want to show and also show you a couple of data tools that schools do have access to. But again, so thank you, Christina, did a great overview of what is helpful at a tier 1, so universal for everyone available. So now we're getting into tier 2. What could be supportive. And what we've learned is the importance of home visits, but home visits that are not scary, that are supportive and engaging, authentically with families. And so Connecticut has trying to see, I'm going to pop this in the chat, this link. So they have a program around home visitors. Now, they did get some support at the state, like financial support to do this, to actually hire people to do these home visits. So it's not just a one-time home visit. The purpose of this program is to develop, again, authentic relationships as best as you can, and having a follow-up process. So it's not just one visit, it's multiple visits with follow-up connection. So that's one thing. And then personalized phone calls. I think we all know that at any tier, this is good to have positive, not just corrective, phone calls home. And then a student support plan. So one of the resources, and I'll put the link to this in the chat as well, that we encourage schools to use with our data tools is a simple action plan. As far as when you've identified a student, these are the strengths that they have. This is what else we know. And this is the areas of risk. And these are the things, hopefully with the voice of the student, that we can do together to support improvement. And here is an adult advocate, because again, having one adult advocate is the most powerful intervention for reducing the likelihood of suicide, dropout, of all the things that we don't want. So this handout that I put a link into the chat has a space for that. So again, it's kind of simple, but a way for people to track, actually a support plan. And again, the support plan includes a student's voice, it includes the family's voice, it includes the positive things, and also incentives. And then there's power in peers. So even having some programs have peers, like students, a buddy system, that a peer is calling their buddy when they're not in school. So they do the phone calls, not the school. So that's another one. So if we can go to the next slide. Around communication, I believe this is the video. So this is a 4-minute video. All right. So the other, as far as tier 3, now these are the extreme kind of cases. There is a great program in Christian County that connects students who have been adjudicated with people in the community. And basically what they do is they do community field trips. So they do things that a lot of the young people have not had opportunities to do. So things like the YMCA or, trampoline parks kind of let them be kids again. And that showed significant reduction in their offending, their likelihood of offending again. So that was a pilot program that had a really positive impact because, of their engagement with the young people in positive ways. The other thing is mentors, how positive and powerful mentors can be. So students with mentors are much less likely to miss school. So there's, different mentor programs. And in Hardin County, they actually use the early warning tool that I will show you in a moment to assign secret mentors to the Frisk. And so that's powerful. I also know that it can be problematic if people become mentors and don't follow through on the adult end. That can actually re-traumatize some kids. I have have had attachment breaks with people. Anyway, just wanted to point that out. Like, people who decide to be mentors should stay committed. And then tier 3. So one of the things that I've done is analyze the missing children. So these are data that come from the Kentucky State Police of children who are reported missing. Now, there's a National Center for Exploited Children, NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who also say that it's conservative because these are only kids that are reported missing. We have kids missing all the time that never get into the Kentucky State Police database. So between 2019 and 2022, we had 13,000 incidences of missing kids. And many of those kids were missing multiple times. So they're either running away or they're being taken. And students in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, so that's the grade levels that we're seeing the highest risk. There are overrepresentations of Black students and students in special education. And October, September, and May were the most frequently reported missing months, but it's all year round. So. And then next slide, please. The reason why our office also deals with trafficking. So since 2017, there has been a law on the books that every single public school should have the human trafficking hotline posted because it is it's the biggest growing crime in the world. It's in every single neighborhood, rich and poor alike. Around 60% of kids being trafficked are being trafficked by their family. So kids being trafficked don't know the word trafficking and that actually applies to them. So we're working on putting out some new posters in January, which is Trafficking Awareness Month. But it's estimated that within 48 hours of hitting streets, kids that go missing or run away, 1/3 are recruited into the world of prostitution or trafficking. Really, they're not prostitutes, they're being trafficked, they're victims. So schools are the front lines of both preventing and awareness education, as well as when they come back, supporting them. So we do have an automated process when a kid is returned. A note comes around supporting the student and the trauma they may have experienced. Okay, next slide. So this is just one of the slides that we share when we do trainings. We have some posters. It's not just sex trafficking, it's labor trafficking. Kentucky's been in national news for this particular issue. And we have a one-page protocol that kind of tells educators, here's the signs to look for and here's what you can do. We're trying to improve all of this because we deal with so many different areas, but this is an area of focus, especially moving forward. And then last slide, I think, I'm going to show you the data tools. So I'm going to need to share my screen.
All right.
And
there you go.
Again, I can't, but I'm going to just share and walk through a couple of these tools that schools have access to. So I'm hoping you all can see. Okay, great. Thanks, Marcia. All right. So, okay. They do have this report where they can quickly see which students are chronically absent. I won't go through that because I know we have limited time. And I want to just show you a pretty neat tool that's using artificial intelligence / machine learning. So it's taking everything that a school knows about each individual student and comparing those students to students in the same exact school and what those students' outcomes were to identify the level of risk that the students are. So if you're at a school, you're just going to see a picture of the whole school. So at this school, you can see tier 1 is the green, tier 2 is the yellow, and tier 3, our highest risk kids are red. So I'm just flying through this, but basically, you get a score from 50, which means you're at the highest risk. That's the lowest score, to 150, which is the highest score, lowest risk, right? So it's green, red, yellow. And what you would automatically do is come down and you have the overall score, which is a grad score, and that's made up of attendance, behavior, curriculum, which is how you're doing in class, and stability. Now, the reason why this tool is so powerful, meaning if 0 is random prediction and 1 is a perfect prediction, early warning ranges between 0.9 and 0.95. So it's near perfect in its predictive power on which kids need help, because it's taking everything it knows in the student information system and feeding it into this to identify by comparing each individual kid with kids in the same school. So in one school where 5 absences is a problem, in another school it's not. So it's all kind of weighted differently depending on the context. So stability, the reason why this tool is so powerful in helping people catch kids not on the radar is because stability is all things. Are you homeless? Are you in an alternative school? How many times has your phone number changed? How many times have you moved? How many times does your parent or guardian log into the portal to check on your work? So it's taking a lot of proxies for things we don't have access to. Like if your parent was incarcerated, we don't know that. But if you have different people moving in the household, or you live in a zip code that's high poverty, it's picking up all of that. So basically, if I select the student, I can look at trends over time in attendance, behavior, curriculum, and then I can see some of the information. So I'm just doing a quick overview of that just so you can kind of see what schools have access to as far as intervening early, like helping identify not just the kids in red that need help now, but kids in yellow. And the other tool, considering we're talking about attendance, is a companion to early warning. So they have access to looking at what's happening school-wide for attendance, behavior, course performance, and stability. So I'll just show you real quick. This is, they have an ability to basically look at who is absent and by what tier. So you have, let's see, I just want to focus on my freshmen, my 9th graders in this school. This is fake data. Well, I'm not worried about these kids actually that are less than 5% absent. I'm really worried about these kids that are over 30% absent. So I double click and then I get their names right there. You can also look at why are kids absent. So this is going to tell you real-time data. What is the highest absent days? And like right here, I can see if I hover over, we have the highest number of absences is related to unexcused. Now, if I, again, am just focusing on my freshmen, I'm going to look at what's happening there. And, there's different ways you can display the information. But if I just look at, I can see parent note, that means they had a parent note, or there's doctor's notes, but I can see what's happening by weekday. So this looks like a busy chart. There are a lot of different ways to kind of to do this to customize all of this. And this is a whole, at least hour-long training as far as these different tools. But just to give you a taste of the data tools that they have available to them that we're training on. And then I think the last slide, and I'm really sorry that video didn't play. The last slide, I don't know if the slide's up. I don't see the slide up, but we have our new chronic absenteeism webpage that has a whole toolkit for families. It has a toolkit which includes things for families on the KDE chronic absence webpage. So check that out when you get a chance. And I can put that in the link right before we leave. And now I'm going to turn it over because the last thing that we wanted to share with you all was services potentially available to families. There we go, that Christina's going to talk about. So I'm going to hang up and come back because I can't hear anyone. So
Thank you, Judy. So, the reason that we put on here services that are potentially available is that there's going to be some variation from one school district to the next, and even from one school in a district to another school in the same district as far as specific services that are available. So this is not intended to be a comprehensive list or finite list for every school in Kentucky, but just some things that, we wanted you all as the Family Partnership Council to be aware of and to know might be available to students and to families. Some of these are going to be available to everybody, but some of them are not. So when we look at access to school counselors, I would love to tell you that every school in Kentucky has a school counselor, but unfortunately, we still have about 8.8% of our schools that don't have a school counselor. But in schools where they do exist, school counselors provide services around academic development, career development, and then as well as social and emotional or personal social development as well. And so they can be a valuable resource for students to be able to access, and the majority of schools that do have them. But that small percentage that don't, that can be an issue. Schools that also have FRISC services can really be a great help to families. And so FRISCs really help to break down the non-academic barriers that can stand in the way of student success. They work with students on basic needs, looking at school supplies, clothing and hygiene, food assistance, for some of them housing assistance and transportation assistance, just all of the basic needs that a family and student may have, looking at health and wellness services that are available, falls under the FRISCs as well. They also help with some educational programs around tutoring and homework help, doing family literacy services. A lot of times will come through the FRISC office, parent and family engagement pieces, as well as after school programs that are available for families and students to tap into, that will oftentimes connect them to like childcare support and enrichment activities for the students to participate in. And then in Kentucky, around trauma-informed practices, and I did forget to tell you all, I dropped this list in the chat. So if you will flip over to the chat, Judy dropped in 2 links right above that. I have this list for you all to refer to. I should have told you that from the beginning. But when it comes to trauma-informed practices and plans, really looking at what are we doing to help address the needs of the most vulnerable students in our population? Because when we do that, it benefits every student. And we can't tell by looking at a student who has trauma in their background and who doesn't, because trauma happens to all people, right? And, it's not just one particular student group. And so in Kentucky, we do have a law that says that schools now have to have trauma-informed practice plans in place, and this will be the first year that they have to upload them into a system and have some record keeping of all of that. So looking at what the trauma-informed practice plans are that schools are taking into account and putting into practice. Truancy diversion plans have been around for a long time. Judy talked with you a few minutes ago around student support plans and really looking at, what the student strengths are and what the things that they can draw on in order to be successful in school and to support good attendance. Truancy diversion plans have the term truancy in them, but really the intended purpose behind a truancy plan is to come up with a plan that says these are the support services that the school can offer you. And then this is the plan of action that the student and the family are going to put into place. So they kind of go hand in hand with what Judy was talking about a few minutes ago. Looking at the Infinite Campus parent and student portal, that is something that every student and every parent in Kentucky has access to, and parent or guardian has access to. Considering those personalized text messaging programs regarding attendance that we talked about very early on in the presentation. And then, what do those positive behavior supports, the PBIS supports, and what do they look like and how are they feeding into the school culture? And so what are we doing to make sure that the culture and the climate that people are experiencing when they're in our building and when they walk in there, that is good and positive and inviting and authentic. We've used that term a few times, authentic. Some schools have calming spaces or resources within the school building that students can tap into while they are there, if they need a place to just go and to calm down so that their anxiety is building, they don't feel like they have to leave the school, they can stay, get through the moment, and then be able to return to class. And then we've already talked about the importance of being able to access food. So and those are mostly school-based support services. There are some community and outside agency support services that schools can partner with for students to be able to tap into. Those could be the mental health, physical health, and dental services that we talked about earlier in the presentation, but also building community awareness campaigns. What is it that the community needs to know? Because again, we talked about that educator lens. We a lot of times approach those conversations and we forget not everybody talks the same language that we talk or sees things through the same lens that we see them. So what are the things that we want to raise awareness about in the community in terms of supporting education? And then, our communities are just vitally important whenever it comes to helping to provide like pantry donations, clothing donations, school supply donations, and things that help just to provide those basic needs for students. And then wrapping up very quickly, just looking at some shared supports. So, a lot of times it is not just the school staff who is offering tutoring services and programs, but community agencies who are coming in to offer those as well. So that's a lot of times can be a collaborative venture between the two, looking at homework help centers and where those are offered in the community and connecting students and making sure that they are aware of that. Providing group counseling services. Sometimes that's the school counselor. Sometimes it's an in-house mental health service provider. Other times it comes from outside community agencies that are coming in to provide those counseling services. And then parent education workshops and mentoring programs are oftentimes also collaborative pieces between the school and the outside community. So I do have 2 additional resources that I'm going to drop in. Judy talked with you very briefly about the chronic absenteeism website in Kentucky. We have developed a whole host of new resources. I'm going to drop that into the chat so that when the meeting is over, you can go through and look at some of those new resources, including a toolkit designed for districts and schools to use around supporting attendance. And then I am also going to drop
It's in there,
the chat.
Christina.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Somebody had put it in there. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm also going to drop in our persistence to graduation webpage. Sorry, I got lost in trying to cut and paste and talk at the same time. So I've also dropped in the persistence to graduation team's webpage on the website and all of the resources that we have available around the early warning tool and insights, as well as chronic absenteeism. That way, if you would like to forward it on to a school or a community member that you were talking about, we're just trying to raise awareness about all of the resources that we have available. So.
And the video link that didn't work is in the chat. So if you want to watch it later, I think it's worth a watch.
And I do apologize that we could not get that working. It did work in the test, and I'm so glad you're back with us. I just want to thank you. That was wonderful and lots of information. So I want to open this up for questions from the group, and I'm trying to be able to see, but if you could come off mute and just go ahead and ask your question. I think we have Judy and Christina still with us.
A quick question. Hello, Judy. Good to see you. And you too, Christina. Melissa Goins, the Director for Family Resource Services Centers. Judy, do you have an estimation of, I don't know how to ask this best, do you feel like most school districts, that the right people at most school districts have a thorough understanding of how to use the early warning tool and are using it effectively? It's a wonderful tool. It's not new. It's been around for a while, but I keep feeling like there are people that I know that not all of our FRIST even have access to it, because permissions are given at the district level. And even though we've asked and we've told them to ask, I know that they all don't have access to it. So is there a breakdown? Do you feel like, just give me more information about your thoughts on that?
Okay. That's a great question, and something I've grappled with before we got some more capacity on our team. So right now, about 68% of districts, so that doesn't mean every school, 68% of districts are using early warning actively, but it varies in terms of how they're using it, how often they use it. Are they using it within a system? Because when we train that we give examples of districts and schools using it in a system, because it's not enough just to have a tool. It has to be implemented effectively to actually make a difference. And we've seen some amazing examples of that happening. However, because we have a lot of turnover, there's always new people that need to understand how to use the tool. So I think part of the challenge is like the level of turnover, I guess, of people in different positions. Also, like you said, access. There's still a challenge sometimes of administrators or even the district even giving access, allowing access to certain role groups. I just trained homeless coordinators last week, and they were super engaged. Like most of them had not seen the tool, had not used it, and I mean they're helping coordinate services for students that are homeless, right? So, it's a good. It's really hard. I mean, and sometimes districts are paying vendors. Like we helped Kentucky develop this tool. We helped Infinite Campus. Like we seeded the money, and that's why it's only free in Kentucky. But a lot of states are paying big money for this tool because again, it is very powerful. So it's just like with everything else, like with the human trafficking law, it's been on the book since 2017, and you will go into many schools and never see the poster because they just don't know. So communication is a big challenge, and I don't know how to fix any of these problems.
Thank you.
But
I will say that every time we are before a group teaching, so prime example, yesterday I had a session on insights at the Continuous Improvement Summit, had about 85 to 90 people in that particular group. And I always make a point to say your frisks need access. Like I am spreading that
Thank you.
message far and
I
wide
appreciate.
because, having just
That was gonna be
recently
my next
stepped out of a
question.
yeah, having just recently stepped
Yeah.
out of a school system, I mean, the services that you all are providing are all of these tools feed into the work that you are tasked with. I mean, in a lot of school buildings, you all are the ones who are heading up the attendance team, right? You need
Right.
access to this data so you know how to best help students.
That's right. And that's, it's also just about resources. And I promise this is the last thing I'll say on this, I promise. And I'll let Rhonda, because I know she has her hand up. But, we all have, too much to do, not enough resources. And so I see something like this as a smarter way to use our resources. Doing a tier 1 intervention on attendance is all fine and good, but being able to target our resources to the students that most need it for reasons that we can't know by just like without the tool, right? So I think it's just such a big deal to make sure the right people have access to the tool, they know how to use it, because our resources are way too precious for us to not know how to target the right students. So with that, I'll be quiet.
Oh, Melissa, thank you. You're always welcome to talk. You have great questions and input. And I appreciate that because, I want to say this, Rhonda, and I promise I'm coming to you. I think it's super important that having that system, like the FRISC, be part of that system, so that even if you're pulling that information and sharing it in a team, that FRISC is part of that. And so even without access, there's a way to bring them in and use those as a targeted resource. So just making sure, I'd love to hear more on the systems. Rhonda, you've been so patient. Go, it's your turn.
No worries at all. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I appreciate y'all so much. One of the things too, looking at, because we have with Kentucky STEM been sharing out a lot, as I know other community members statewide and locally, about spreading the word about chronic absenteeism. What we are seeing is some unintentional consequences of people trying to spread the word, that they're not being careful in their terminology and respecting family culture, that it is being taken, and the backlash that I am seeing throughout the state. So we're actually hurting our efforts better than helping. And one of the things, and especially looking at, the resources and like on your all's webpage, we've been trying to be very intentional in our messaging to send it out, that we're not, most parents, we all know how important school attendance is. And it's not because we don't want our children to be there, it's because the issues that are causing it are not being addressed. And many families, whether it be excused or unexcused absences, but having the tools, and maybe if we can all concentrate on spreading the awareness, because yes, we needed everybody to understand chronic absenteeism to be excused and non-excused, right? But how do we then concentrate because we got to bring us back some because things have been taken the wrong way, but with all good intentions, if I'm making sense. But how do we concentrate on maybe with the campaign of looking at if it's because they are depressed or because of anxiety, how do we concentrate? Is it because of their behavior? Is it because they're having to get therapies outside of school? Those are the huge things that are causing them to be absent. And maybe if we concentrate on that in our messaging and give some tools that they could take right away, it'll help because I don't know if any of you all have seen it, but I've seen some things that have it's sort of ruining the relationship where it's meant to build the relationship with families and schools. Another thing too, especially with for students with disabilities, which is one of the largest, if I remember right in the data that was shared last time, one of your largest groups that are chronically absent. We're working with families in here over and over. It's because of informal removals that are not being documented. Schools telling them don't send them. It's not because they've been suspended. And so as a parent, how can they attend school if the school's telling us not to? But then also looking at they're having to get related services that they can't through school and actually at the recommendation of their medical doctors, but the schools are telling you and the only time you can get it is during the school day. So you're asking parents to choose impossible decisions. Do they go to school or do they get the medical treatment or the therapy they need? And especially with our population and the high numbers, those are your reasons behind it. And the anxiety and depression. So I know I rambled, but if we can work together in how we can help to address that and the school climate, because our parents are advocating, but they're not finding that champion for their child. The culture is not there. How can we help to build that?
Thank you, Rhonda. Does anyone want to chime in? And Rhonda, I think you hit a key thing about that relationship building and getting to the root cause of each child's absences, which goes back to what Melissa brought up about, the FRIS being involved and really using the tools that Judy shared, like who and why. And I mean, that bar graph, Judy, that is fascinating to be able to see why and what days students are absent and use that as part of how do we communicate in our message when we know who, when, and what days. I will share this, and it's going to be interesting to see in some of my work outside of the Family Partnership Council. One of the districts that I work with, they've actually published a 2-year school calendar and tried really hard to butt up days off with holidays and things. They've been very intentional in that calendar and sharing that 2 years in advance with families. And part of the reason was for doctor's appointments and for these things that they're going to be doing. And so just being more mindful of everything that we do that connects back and impacts attendance and families and things that go on is at least a step in a positive direction, I would think. Judy, do you want to say something?
Yeah, and sorry, the tornado sirens are going, so I probably should get in a different place. But I will say thank you very much for bringing up some of the most pertinent issues that we do have that we do need to address, because, mental health is one of the biggest reasons, right, that students are, and even though it may be labeled as a doctor's note or, a parent note or, it's an excused absence, like it is something that is across the board something we have to address. Mm-hmm. Actually, a new study just came out that it was nationally represented, over 20,000 kids in high school just alone, 75%, right? They did repeated measures, 75% reported every time they checked in with them. They're either sad, bored, or tired. Like So there's a lot of underlying issues that we definitely need to address. This chronic absenteeism is simply a symptom of all these other things. And then what you brought out also, because this does connect with discipline, if we are suspending and pushing kids out and informally doing that, which in my years of working in schools and working at a district level, and having a lot of kids in the system, I have seen a lot of those cases. That is the reality that we don't often talk about, but that does happen. Don't send them home, but don't document it, or don't bring them in. And I'm glad you're raising that, because maybe through this work, we can get to some of those things that are happening that are harmful and that we need to just, put a stop to. And get to we need more resources and more capacity to deal with all of the things we didn't do after COVID, right? The grief, the loss, the trauma, and the ongoing stuff. There's a lot of suffering among kids, among adults. So I think, and I really have a lot of faith in our new commissioner, who seems very wise and very thoughtful, that, I know the next kind of thing we're going to be addressing is teacher well-being. But I really trust that we are going to be able to do some of this work that maybe hasn't happened in the past. So I don't hear the sirens anymore, but I'll stay on here. So
Judy,
thanks for bringing that.
And I will say that when it comes to the insights dashboards, Judy showed just one out of many in the essence of time. We do entire trainings, around that. But, some of those behavior dashboards really give administrative teams an opportunity to sit down and really look at what their discipline practices are, and also to calibrate, right? And so if you are sending students home and you're using a specific attendance code to do that, you can pull that, because I wonder if maybe it's happening more frequently than anybody realizes, because you've got multiple people in the same building who are doling out discipline, right? So now we have an opportunity to use a data system where those administrative teams can sit down and really look and calibrate and say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what we need to change as well.
Amy's been very patient. Your hand's up. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to speak a little bit because Christina mentioned about the school culture and how that can kind of drive having encouraged, student attendance or excitement about attending for different things. And something that's happening in our district that's new at our school this year is that they've started implementing some of the Ron Clark type plans, if you're familiar with those, but they've made some teams of students in our school, and the teams are made up of kids from kindergarten through 5th grade. They've incorporated everything from project-based learning with 5th graders that are then running Stallions Academies to teach the kindergartners what it means to be a student at our school. So everything from my kindergartner is super excited that he gets to have a 5th grade buddy that helps guide him through learning what it means to do school every day. While also having those 5th grade students present to large groups of parents. Like 350 parents last week heard 5th grade students give their experiences about their time at school. And some of the things that they're doing is they're rewarding it with PBIS. They're giving house points when they're doing things that are good. I volunteer regularly and have for 4 years now. And I noticed the other day in the building that 12 different students asked me if there was anything they could do to help me carry my things that I was bringing in the building. So it's a noticeable shift in the culture. And one thing that I think is important and notable is that our principal has mentioned that he has noticed almost 2.5% increase in attendance compared to last year, just over these first few weeks of school. And so it might be a success story. I'm not sure. It's still new, right? But I just wanted to share that of those things you mentioned, I noticed it in my own kids, that they're excited about it in a different way than they were before. So while that's just a tier 1 thing, it's something positive.
And
That is a great example.
I think back to involving parents, families, kids in the solution, which I was going to mention when Rhonda spoke. That's such an important part of just simple things like messaging. If there's any way to just like have a parent there to say, what would it feel like if you got this in the mail? What would it feel like if this was the door hanger that was on your door? What would it feel like? Because back to something that Christina said, we don't all think like educators. I am not an educator and never was. I think very much like the parent on the other side of the door. And so looking at things, it's helpful to know if it would elicit defensiveness, right? Or if it's sending a different message. So.
Thank you for
Thank you.
saying that. And I would, I would say that extends to asking community members to partner with you too, because what does that messaging need to look like and sound like when we, are sending awareness campaigns out to them also. And then Amy, your example really hit on that whole CASEL framework, right? And what is it that we are trying to teach students? So we want them to be socially aware and self-aware and learn how to manage their own business and make responsible decisions. And so all of that feeds into what you were sharing and what they're trying to teach students in the building, because that extends out not only to what we're doing in the classroom, but what are we doing at the school level? And then what are we doing with families in the community? And it all, it flows. If that's what we're teaching them to do in the classroom, it's going to have an impact on what they do outside of the classroom as well.
And I think I saw Leah's hand first, and then we have Laura. So Leah, can you go ahead with your thoughts?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Marcia. One school in our district I noticed, I was driving past the other day, and for their tardy sign-ins, so we think about students who might have to come in late and when they might prefer to stay home the rest of the day if they had an appointment or what have you, but they have a sign, a large sign that they put out front that says, "We're so glad you're here, but an adult needs to sign you in the front." And I think that messaging that Melissa was mentioning earlier, that is a tiny shift from what it used to be, where it was like this awkward, you're late, you're tardy, you're going to have to come in. But now it's this welcoming message that says, "We're glad you're here," and then have your parent come in and sign you in. So there are small shifts. One of the things that really stands out to me when we talk about student sadness or depression or anxiety, I can't help but think about their concern over their own personal safety and what it feels like to go to a school in this day and time. I have, 2 college-age students, and then I have 2 that are a middle school and high school. And their childhood experience and their schooling experience is so vastly different than most of ours that to even think about going into a building and worrying about personal safety was never a concern in my mind. I didn't ever experience a lockdown in my entire schooling experience. Maybe I had a tornado drill, but I don't remember any time when I ever felt that my personal safety was at risk. And to think about the reality of the news that they see, the TikTok, the 24-hour news cycle is so prevalent in their hands all the time, and they know every situation that comes up, and how that has to play on your psyche, and how that has to just be a subconscious thought all the time. And then we think, well, why can't we get kids to come to school? Or why do we have so many students going to homeschool or doing virtual school? And their parents are also worried. So there are serious consequences to the world that we live in. And I think that has to be a conversation around how do we help students feel secure, and how do we help them know that we are doing our best to make them feel safe. But also to a couple more points that were made about the engagement piece. As an educator, I know that challenging students to be engaged and doing project-based learning, like Amy mentioned in her school, when students have something to look forward to and they know that they're going to be engaged in authentic learning experiences, that just invigorates them. And they know, even when you're mentioning the product of being able to talk to parents and share it with a real audience, that's what they want. They want to be held accountable to produce something valuable, not just sit and complete a worksheet that they don't know if anybody's ever actually going to look at, or it doesn't matter. So how do we create meaningful work for students to be able to engage in, that they want to come and do? So those are just some thoughts that I have, but I think the safety and the engagement are 2 critical pieces that, if we're really going to make a shift in what's going on in schools, those are 2 key pieces.
Thanks, Leah. And I know, Laura, I'm going to let you go ahead, and then I wanted to come back to something Leah said, but you may be addressing it. So go, Laura.
Thank you, Marcia. I was just going to share that we've been hosting a parent forum once a month. So we do it on the last Monday of the month at 10 a.m. and then again at 7. So just taking from some of the things that parents have shared in that, to several of your all's points. One around language, chronic absenteeism, just the word chronic has like hit a nerve with some parents. Just call it absenteeism. Why does it have to be chronic? And I get that. So I'm sharing that as a part of messaging. Another thing for some of our schools is still the transportation issue and how difficult it is sometimes with transportation. Some other things that were said, and to Leah's point, once the kids are out of elementary school, there's not a lot that parents feel that the kids are excited about in terms of, there's not as many school plays, and there's not talent shows, and there's not that project-based or meaningful work that they can show off to either community members or to parents. And parents feel less engaged because they don't get invited in the school for anything. So that's been a thing too, is like they just feel like they're disconnected, their kids are disconnected. And then I'm going to share one that's a little bit personal to me, but also I think some of my friends are experiencing it. As a remote employee and you have flexibility with your own schedule and you think about things you want to do with your children, it's one of those things for parents who could take kids on trips or involve them in some of the things that they're doing, using that educational enhancement. Is that what it's called? Using that has become more appealing to some people because, you don't have to just do vacations over summer months and things, but then this fear of using it and then, getting the letters and even though it's excused. So it's been one of those things where I've seen a couple of resources pop up here and there around connecting the experience to learning like actual books for parents, which I think could be something that could be expanded on. Like if you had, a trip in mind and you didn't have to come up with how this is going to tie back to standards, but there's something created for you that might be an option and would help the make sure that learning stayed on track. So just some unique things that I think are changing around the way we schedule things and the way families do things together, just to consider. And I'm just hearing this out and about. And then one last thing that's been an issue around, if your school sends your student home because they're sick, some schools will mark that as excused, some schools do not. And then you'll have to take the child to the doctor. And so there's discrepancies around when the school initiates the child coming home because they're sick. And then if they're not well enough to go the next day, but they can't get a doctor's appointment and not having a note, there's just a lot of confusion in that space. And I don't know if that's something that potentially the school nurses and that association of folks could kind of come together on and create some kind of plan to address.
Laura, thank you. That interestingly enough, that is something that I heard recently in another meeting, just the clarification and the clarity around absences, when to be at school, when not to be at school, what happens when you go home early. And so that is, I think, just the clarity of the attendance policy is one key piece. And I think that was spoken in maybe the first meeting that I chaired. We talked about just being, making sure that we knew what the attendance policy was, but it sounds like there needs to be some clarity within the building and that communication to parents. And I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding on that one. I want to circle back, and I know we're getting deep into our time, and Che has a big presentation, but I love this conversation today. It's been very meaningful and very helpful. And Leah, you mentioned about fear, and I saw Judy's comment as well. And we think about personal safety, and I know, we think about it in the things that we hear nationally that happen. And then recently I was with a group and they started talking about how fear of going to school can be relative to what has occurred in their community. And when you think about what happened recently over in Laurel County, when you think about all of the floods that happened, a couple of years ago, and then children are afraid to leave their homes because it might not be there, or they may be afraid to go to school because they can't get home, when weather changes. So that makes me think about the root causes too of the fear, and making sure that those are addressed, so that we can help with those families in those situations. Back to Rhonda's point, really that social and emotional well-being. So you can see how all of these things come together. So I can't thank you all enough. I love this conversation. We could go on and on and on. Before I move forward, are there any last comments or questions? Or is this something that we want to continue this topic into our November meeting? You can let me know now. And now we get quiet, but I want to thank you all for all the resources that are dropped in the chat. That's a rich chat today. And Christina and Judy, thank you so much for coming and sharing. I always learn something new and think about something in a new and different way, which I think is the power of this council and having everyone together. So thank you all so much. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Che, are you ready, or how do you want to approach this?
I just want to say thank you.
A good start is always unmuting yourself before you start talking. This is not my first time I've used Teams, but it will appear that way. Let me see. Do you want to just share and I'll tell you when to flip, or does that work with you?
Let's do that. And I'm trying to get back to my presentation.
Will make this very interactive. I will go pretty fast. There are a lot of slides, and I actually cut about 20 out because I do not like the suffering of sitting through my presentations. I don't want to do that to you all. And chronic absenteeism is a wonderful segue into my slides. We'll talk a little bit about attendance and how important it is. It's not a big secret. It's a big driver of funding. And we just went across the river to talk to legislators about chronic absenteeism and how that impacts funding and stuff. So my name's Che Ritter. Been with the department 16, 17 years. Came through as a financial analyst. Eventually managed a branch that ran SEEK and tax rates, all the fun stuff that you get in the mail from your county and cities. And we do a few other odds and ends, transportation, facilities, basically, the operations side. We're within the Office of Finance and Operation, which includes budgets, HR, and school and community nutrition. We have, I think we're around 50 people or so, plus some contractors. So a pretty good sized division, and it's always humming here as it is today. You can go on to the next slide if you like. So this is kind of the quick and dirty presentation of, where a lot of this funding comes from. During, of course, when the General Assembly's in, you'll hear a lot about, you'll hear a lot of accusations usually that there's not enough, or there's too much, or we're giving them just enough, and things like that. That's not really for us to determine. We're more worried about the math side of it to make sure it will work, to make sure we get the right amount of funding out to each of our districts so we can support these programs to help educate these students, pay teachers, pay bus drivers, et cetera. But obviously we get a good chunk from the feds, and most recently ESSER funds, which most of you probably heard of, went out to districts during the pandemic. There's USDA funds through school and community nutrition, and a big chunk of money comes from the state, obviously, which is handled through the budget appropriation. We do work very closely with the Legislative Research Commission staffers during the budget season, as well as the governor's budget staff, to help develop the, kind of K through 12 budget. There's a lot of, nuance to it, and a lot of weird, just processes that we've done for many budget cycles. And it's always something very different. And, whoever the governor might be in that cycle wants a certain amount of funding, and the General Assembly typically might disagree with that. So we kind of run back and forth between the two, trying to make sure the math is correct, because that's what's important to us. Locally, and this is what really hits our pockets, you'll get a tax bill probably here in just a little while from your local school district. And when your birthday month, when you go and pay your car taxes, a good chunk of that goes toward the schools. We help the school districts kind of set that amount every year. Obviously makes us very popular with taxpayers out there calling KDE. But this is a very large, as you'll see, chunk of money as well that goes into our public school system. Of course, with KDE, you've got the area technical centers as well. And there's also a big chunk of money that comes through the budget appropriation from the state called On Behalf, and that's retirement, health insurance, and some life insurance stuff. So that's sort of we're paying that on behalf of school districts. So that's why it's called On Behalf. Not very complicated, but it is also a very large amount of money. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is what it sort of looks like. And typically, obviously in this case, it grows quite a bit. And a lot of this is sort of the ebb and flow of the universe. During COVID, we got a lot more federal revenue, and that's going to start peeling off a little bit. As a matter of fact, in 6 days, I believe, we run up against one of our last deadlines for, kind of ESSER 3 is, quote, over. They should have spent it, things like that. And so that will get wrapped up eventually. And so we expect federal revenue to kind of start shrinking down some. And with state revenue, a lot depends too, when they create the budget, how state revenue looks. If we're very flush and we've got great economic development going on, a lot of sales tax revenue, a lot of revenue from A, B, and C, then that will help support maybe a higher per pupil amount, which eventually translates into 2.5 billion, 2.6 billion, depending on what they want to do with it. Again, the On Behalf is almost even with the SEEK part, which is the SEEK, of course, the program that we use. It's kind of an allocation model that goes out to each school district. And again, the On Behalf's like the retirement benefits for our teachers, as well as health insurance. Other state revenues, these are grants typically. These come, if you've ever seen Karen Worth's area up there on the 5th floor, that's a lot of those people are working on state grants. And then local taxes is a huge chunk of this too. Of course, that's driven locally by your Board of Education. If you live in Anderson County, every year that Anderson County Board will meet, usually late July, early August, to start kind of developing a tax adoption policy for that year. And it fluctuates year to year. So overall, 10 to 11 million bucks right there. It's a lot of our, if you look at big picture, Medicaid and K through 12 education are two of the largest. We, I think like corrections and a few of the others aren't even remotely close to the amounts we spend on K through 12. So that's why there's a lot of focus on it. Pretty normal that the legislators are always asking questions about how it's spent. And a lot of questions about, how we allocate these funds. We are during session typically over there a lot talking to legislators, and sometimes it's just the finance people, sometimes it's the commissioner obviously is with us. And in the last couple of budgets, there may be a topic du jour that they're interested in on the financial side, and we'll help craft policy to make sure it will work. So what we don't want them to do is obviously pass laws that we can't implement. You can go to the next slide, please. So this all started back around the late 80s, early 90s with the court case Rose versus Council for Better Education. And if you didn't know, Robin Kinney, our former interim, who's only here for a short time, she was part of that court case. She was actually a clerk for that judge. His name was Ray Corns. A little bit of history, and that was known as CARA, which as an extension of that, they created SEEK. You can go to the next slide. And really, if you think of it like kind of a deranged meatloaf, financial meatloaf, there's a lot of ingredients that go into it. It's a little overwhelming at first because there's just a lot to it. But the more you look at it, the more sense it will make, I promise. And some of that is thinking about what we're trying to do, and who we're funding. It's really a lot of demographic data for students. There's some other odds and ends, but really the core part of it is all about students. Those kids that are in the seats and we always pay on prior year data. So we look behind us and say, okay, this school district had 1,000 kids. And of those, 62% were free lunch. So we pay a little extra for that. And it goes through this cycle of calculations, which we run 3 times a year. And as we go through the year, we're kind of refining it and getting it a little more fine-tuned. Then we get to March 1, and that's the last time we're going to calculate it for the year. But these are most of the what we call inputs that go into the formula. Some of these you'll recognize, of course, like December 1st child count for exceptional children, limited English proficient kids, aka EL. That's kind of thrown around. Early graduation is actually a newer thing, and that's more of an adjustment for students who are on this early graduation track. AADA, some of you probably recognize that. At risk is simply free lunch. And there's some other weird ones like maximum tier 1 rate. I heard every time I hear tier 1, everyone uses that. Ours is very different than what they're just that Judy and them were talking about. Levied equivalent rate's another one. Since we're dealing with tax rates, there's a lot of tax policy kind of built into this. You can go to the next one. And
Tay,
what we'll do.
I love your comment about financial meatloaf. That made a lot of sense with all of
yeah,
those
because
pieces.
everybody wants to do it a little differently. That's what we kind of look at it. Yeah. It's some people don't want certain things in there, and that's probably the longest 17-year conversation I've had at KD is what should be in and what shouldn't be out. There's always been talk of reform, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. But you start off with the base. And this is simply a per pupil amount, and it changes every budget. Typically, they can leave it flat. In my memory, they've not reduced it in any budget. But there is a way that you actually could get less, and it's if there's not enough money to fully fund it. That's kind of a nightmare for us, but it doesn't happen very often. Knock on this wood, but. Basically, you'll see in the first year of this budget that we're currently in, 4,326, and then it goes to 4,586. But as I tell districts, there's a little bit of Frankfurt math. That looks very nice, but districts don't quite get all of that. It depends on where you are. Some will get more, some will get less, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. You can go on to the next one. So this gives you an idea of the components or the inputs that are, some of them in there, what they cost us per year. Free lunch, we've always funded free lunch. And districts, you'll hear about, districts that are 100% free lunch. I'm sure some of you are probably in those districts. That is a federal program, but this is on top of that. We're very proud of the fact that districts went to 100%. We think it's a wonderful thing, but this is in addition to that. This is to help educate, sort of, subsidize, if you will, not the feeding. That's what the other program's for. This is really to pay for the educating part of children who are on free lunch. Someone much smarter than me years ago figured out, and rightfully so, that these kids are hungry, they can't learn. This will help push that. And, not only does the federal program feed them, the state program can help educate them. So we're, this isn't going to go anywhere, I hope, in the near future. But you notice out of around, I'm just saying 600,000 kids, we've got about 370,000 free lunch students. Of course, depending on if you, threw a dart at a map, you may hit a district that's 98% free lunch, or in some cases, 3%. It varies across the state. The average is somewhere in like the 50-60% range, I think, and has been for quite some time. Exceptional child count, this is a big one for us. You've got severe and moderate, and then your speech students. And if you'll notice, that's almost $500 million. Now, here's the thing we struggle with this number is as our population of students declines, this number keeps going up. We make a lot of phone calls because it's such a big ticket item in our budget, $500 million. And it has grown. Even through COVID, it was still growing. We work with the OSIL across the hall here, Special Education and Early Learning, to try to understand this data. Why is this population growing? We'll call JCPS as special ed people and ask them 82 questions. We like to randomly call districts and just ask them obvious questions and not so obvious, trying to understand the context of where are these kids coming from? Are they being identified more? What are we seeing? What's the pattern? We want to understand that because we're going to eventually get questions from the General Assembly. Why is this almost $500 million? Do you see it slowing down? Short answer is no, we don't see it slowing down. It continues to grow. So we try to prepare for that in our budget. when we create it, we try to kind of hedge our bets a little bit and say we're going to have more exceptional kids, more severe, more moderate. Of course, speech kids, and I was one of those, Mrs. Griffin in first through third grade, I think. So they kind of cycle in and out. Those kids are kind of recycled once they get to a point, and they move them out of speech, and then there's a new batch that comes in. So that number's pretty static. But you'll notice there's a pretty large chunk of students that are considered moderate. Home hospital, these are students obviously that have, unfortunately, some medical issue that they cannot actually physically attend school. This has changed a little bit with virtual. As a child of the early 90s, we didn't really have the virtual option. Now that is an option, but there's still some pretty tight rules about how home hospital students and the visits and all of that we all knew back in the day. In limited English, this is probably the newest, and by new I mean 2006. They added this to the SEEK program, so they haven't done a whole lot of changes to it. This was one of them, and this population is usually regional. Warren County, Bowling Green, Jefferson, Woodford, Shelby, Fayette, some areas in Northern Kentucky, they'll have a higher population. Bowling Green is one of my great examples. They have, I think, some crazy number of languages in their school, so they open an academy. JCPS has some like 80-something languages or even more. It's something crazy. So it's really it's a small amount of money. 16 million is nothing in the big picture, but this money does help support those students and obviously pay for the staff that are there to educate these students. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is basically a SEEK calculation, in this case, Anderson County. No reason we picked on Anderson, it's an A district, so we just grabbed it. But this shows you in the upper left box, this is sort of the ingredients that goes in, and then over to the right in the kind of middle column, or it's just math. Your average or aggregate average daily attendance is a big driver, and that's the most generic example is if you're a student and you're there 95% of the time, your aggregate's like 95% or 0.95 AADA. There's some adjustments for weather, and you'd mentioned this mess in Laurel County. We're constantly worried about, and we already got questions, how that impacts attendance. Districts are hyper aware of anything that can impact attendance will impact their funding. So we're on the phone a lot with DPPs and others and superintendents, weather, floods, tornadoes, illness, anything that can impact that. If there's some type of weird situation like the one in London, definitely qualified as that. Or if there's a chemical spill and they have to say, look, we can't open school today, we're constantly kind of on that cycle of talking to districts and the commissioner's office to make sure everyone's aware this is how it's going to impact them. You can go to the next slide and probably skip. Yeah, so this is Wolfe County, just a different set of numbers, smaller district, obviously. And I'll talk a little bit about how the math kind of gets into that. You can go into the next one. I think, yeah. So another big part of this, and when you think of your taxing entities that we also love and pay our taxes to, like cities, counties, health departments, et cetera, when you get your tax bill, and if you look at it closely, you'll notice usually the counties and cities are a lot lower than school districts. One thing that school districts have that no other taxing entities have is what's called local effort. And we actually reduced their SEEK funding by 30 cents per $100 of property assessments. So what that really means when you get down to it is there's a pretty sizable deduction. And if assessments have gone up, they're going to get less state funding. If they go down, which they usually don't, especially the last couple of years, we're going to give them more funding. If you think of the seesaw, it's sort of a support thing. If you can tax more locally, the state's not going to give you as much. So we're kind of pushing the responsibility back to the district. But if you are struggling or your community, and in this state, much like many others, you have some areas their property assessments are through the roof, like Anchorage and Beechwood, but you have some areas like Wolfe County and Clay County where it's a much more depressed area. There's not as much economic development, so they would tend to get more state money per student because of that. And a child in Anchorage, they can deal with their own tax rates up there. And to give you a really true example, the district called one day and said, we want to tax, aircraft. And I didn't think anything about it. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, wait a minute, there's not an airport in Anchorage. Well, Papa John had his helicopter there. And they called him. He said, yeah, that's fine. We don't care. If you want to tax it, that's fine. Obviously, we should all have that attitude about our helicopters. I don't, but that money will go to the school district. Now, Wolfe County, who struggles because they don't have that same type of tax base, if they, their tax rates are much lower, their community probably couldn't handle the level of taxes that Anchorage taxpayers pay. That is just how it is across the state. You can drive, anywhere, you can look in your own backyard, and that's, that impacts districts tremendously. Property assessments, and we get those about late July, August. Those are a very hot topic with superintendents every single year, and especially the last couple of years. And when you get your property assessments at the district, they look very quickly and say, well, if we raise taxes, this is what it does. If we keep them the same, and they go through this whole thought process every year trying to figure out what can we levy and not obviously irritate our taxpayers, but at the same time generate enough money to pay for increased expenses, teacher raises, and all kinds of wonderful things. But for every $1 million increase in property assessments, they're going to lose $3,000 in SEEK, and that adds up pretty quickly. I know this last year, Dayton Independent, and maybe 5 years ago, we used to think 3 or 4% growth in the real estate was really outstanding. Dayton grew about 40%. That's how kind of absurd these property assessments have gotten. So they took a huge hit in this, realm of local effort. They're paying a lot more in local effort and getting a lot less from the state. So they sort of have to adjust accordingly. Property assessments, we'll skip through this one pretty quick, but the statewide equalization determines some level of funding from the state. If you can go to the next one, we're going to skip through a couple of these. Now, this is a really important slide, and I think this question may have dropped in the chat somewhat. So if we took two districts and I took one student and I put him in District A, and then the next year I moved him to District B, you'll notice two huge differences here. District A, when you get to the bottom, this student is only generating $6,302. The $4,326, that's the base, but you notice that local effort, right? So that's a little smaller, a negative $767. And then that's a free lunch student. Tier 1 is a different bucket of funding that some districts get. And then local taxes. And you look at District B, they get the same base funding, except their local effort's a lot higher because their property assessments are higher. So they get a lower subtotal, same student, so it's a free lunch kid. And then Tier 1, they get nothing because their tax base is too high. And then local taxes, they generate a lot. So that student, all of a sudden, that same kid would generate $9,531 just right next door. And real life example is if I went to, Beechwood, it's a high taxing district. They don't get much assistance from the state. And then I thought, you know what, my family's moving to Pulaski County or, wherever the next district is. It's a very different type of funding level. You'll have some districts, the community and the economic development, everything stays about the same over time. And you'll have certain areas of the state like Scott County. When I was much younger, Scott County was a sleepy small town, and now it's, apartments and houses and factories and all these things. And so they generate tons and tons and tons of local taxes, which in turn their, per student amount would be much, much higher than, say, Owen County. Owen County doesn't have the same tax base, nor could they generate the same amount of taxes. So this is the difference between literally an imaginary border between two counties or two school districts, I should say. You'll see a really significant difference in some cases between independent districts and county districts just because of size and scale. You can go to the next slide. Transportation is another thing we pay for parts of, And there's some funding that goes to, if you take your students to School for the Blind, School for the Deaf, vocational transportation. This is also, you hear about this a lot more in the last year or two because there's not enough funding to cover the cost. We need about 484 million. That keeps going up. And we get about 274 million, sometimes a little more. I think, you know, it's hard to catch up when there's that big of a gap. But it's based on frequency and distance. It's that formula is a whole other very, very boring set of slides. But basically, there's not enough money in that. It's about 74% funded. General Assembly's moved it up the last couple of budgets, so we're pretty grateful for that. You can go to the next one. You can skip this one. No one wants to know about that one. If you all need some sleep, we can do that. This is one of the big ones, though, is aggregate average daily attendance, AADA. If you ever walk near our area here in the Sauer Building, you hear us talking about this all the time. This is, you know, the kids in the school, we're using the prior year data. And as this data comes in, it's, you know, absences impacted, terrible weather. You know, and you'll have a situation, and we, again, talk about this a lot, and we talk to districts. During this Laurel County situation, even school districts kind of on the edge of that were still going to school, they were getting 60% attendance. And that's not good. So they're trying to figure out, well, how do we deal with this, and what's it going to mean, you know, financially? Districts that close due to emergencies and things, there's different avenues. There's, you know, everyone's heard of NTI days. If we get 3 feet of snow in a region, or flooding, tornadoes, or whatever, there are different avenues for them to recover some of that. But this is a huge factor. Superintendents are very well aware of their attendance rates. And post-COVID, we had some pretty weak attendance percentages. That's getting a little better, so that helps their funding. Everyone, I think, agrees that attendance is a good thing. Stronger attendance is even better. So this is getting a little better in our state, which we're very happy to see that. You can go to the next slide, please. Again, free lunch. They pick up about $640 or $650 or so per student. And for a district that's got a lot of free lunch kids, this becomes a very important bucket of money. Go ahead. So again, this is just special ed students. This is the categories that are in those three categories. And you can skip to the next one. And this is the money they get there. So obviously, the way this is broken up, speech students, they get an additional 1,000. And then moderates about 5, and then the most severe will get about 10,000 per. I will tell you that 10,000 sounds like a lot of money, but when you dig into the numbers, districts typically are spending double that. So where does that other half come from? From their local money. And it's unrestricted, meaning when we send them this money, it doesn't have to go to that severe student. It has to go to their general fund. And through their budgeting process, they say, we're going to allocate, you know, basically $20,000 for each severe kid, or 10 million, whatever it is. And when I first got here and started crunching all these numbers, and we're not, you know, very cognizant of how the real world works, that was really pushed in our face by districts. We're spending double what you all are giving us, you know. So one could argue it's kind of a shared thing that the state's helping pay for, and locally. You can go to the next slide. Let's skip through that. Home hospital, it's basically kids that are, you know, unable to come to physically come to school. You can skip that. Limited English, we've talked about that. It's not a lot of money. Bowling Green gets it. Local district taxes, real estate. Oh, you're okay. Real estate, businesses have tangible property, motor vehicles. Some districts will do on your utility bill. If you see it, mine's got a little 3% thing on it. That's from the school district. Thank you, Franklin County. Some districts do occupational tax. Nobody does excise. That's a kind of a weird one. And then aircraft and watercraft. The watercraft part are like these huge coal barges. A lot of the river districts will, you know, tax that. We're not even sure how they actually get, or they know when these boats are coming by, but somehow the Department of Revenue tracks that down for them. But this is a huge portion of the revenue, very important time of year for them to decide, you know, how much they're going to levy and things like that. And when your local property valuation administrator reassesses your property, and you get that wonderful tax bill, which is usually like the biggest part of its schools. That's where this process comes from. You can go to the next slide. Again, it talks, they tax everything. You'll see public service companies, your local utilities, outside of Frankfort, for example, KU, LG&E, a lot of these gas utilities own easements and property. They're also paying these taxes. And this is like almost $3.8 billion that they're collecting out there. And they have different options for tax rates. They're capped at 4%, so they can't do anything over a 4% increase in their revenue unless they basically go through this kind of petition period, and it could result in a vote. The public may have to vote on it. You'll hear districts talk about, paying for facilities, or we need a bigger increase to pay for raises. It's an uphill battle. It's not as easy as, hey, let's do this and be done with it. Obviously, there are some people who are not happy with paying more taxes, and they may go out and hustle and get this petition together and force a vote. You can skip to the next one. And this just shows you districts that levy. There's almost all of them do the utility tax. That's a pretty easy one. Occupational, there's a handful. I know Jefferson County Schools does, Fayette, and a few others. You can go to the next one. So as we get to the end of this, what we call the SEEK cycle, which is basically March, our goal is always have enough money. We work with the state budget director and the Legislative Research Commission and try to do these estimates. We have to estimate like 2 years out. We use a lot of models. We work with a state economist, stuff that's usually way over my head. And somehow through a whole bunch of people and a big box of donuts, we figure out, okay, we've got enough breathing room. Last year, out of $3 billion, we had about 10 million left, about 40 million left, and we're usually under 0.5%. And that's very dangerous, and it's very close, and it keeps me up at night because I really want a much larger cushion. Because if we don't have enough money, we run into what's called a shortfall, where we cannot pay districts with money we don't have. So we actually have to reduce SEEK funding. They've already budgeted. They've already hired teachers. They've already hired custodians. They've hired, bus drivers. And here we are telling them, sorry, we were wrong, and we're not going to be able to pay you the full amount. That's an awkward conversation, and one we really try to avoid. We don't like it. Now, the General Assembly will sometimes come back and say, hey, we found some money. You can, fill the gap up or whatever you need to do. But a lot of times we don't have it. So we really try hard, and with due credit to the governor's budget people who are really good at, doing these models with us and helping us out. So far, again, knock on some wood, we've had some pretty good luck the last couple of budgets. You can jump to the next one. Yeah, so you all can now run SEEK. I'm going to go home and just sit around and watch TV because you all can run this program now. But if you ever have questions, don't hesitate. We're always here. We like to talk about this stuff because it's important. If you've got kids in school or had kids in school or will have grandkids in school, those students will generate funding in your community. This money pays for teachers. It pays for all kinds of things. The commissioner coming out of a district really has a good understanding of sort of the pain points. The formula is not perfect. There's a lot of rigidity in it. There's not a lot of flexibility. Sometimes we need flexibility. And districts, there is a perpetual complaint. I need more, more, more. If teachers want raises, that money has to come from somewhere. You will see a lot of this on the news during session. They're always talking about it. And it impacts a lot of people in our state, taxpayers, students. I've yet to drive through a community and not seen how this money impacts them. It pays for buildings, pays for buses. It pays for pensions, teachers that work 27 years and retire or whatever. This helps pay their salaries and things like that. So it's a really important chunk of money, and that's why there's just so much focus on it, basically throughout the year. Does anyone have any questions? I saw some in
Melissa.
chat. There it is.
Melissa.
Sorry, I couldn't find my chat button.
And then
Rhonda,
Rhonda. Go ahead, Melissa.
You go ahead, Rhonda, if you want to ask the one you put in the chat. That's fine. You were first.
Oh, well, that's okay. One of the things, I just wanted to know the money under the exceptional child, is that all directly out of the federal IDEA funding?
No.
Or is there designated that makes that up from state? Because IDEA has never been fully funded.
Yeah, so
And-
we're separate from all federal funding. And that's the interesting thing is everything I do with that formula, there's no federal money in there. So that money is basically the state share of, the big pot, if you will. Now, if you're familiar with, and I'm going to forget the name because I don't deal with it as much, but the maintenance effort showing that we're spending the right amount for the special education students, it adds your federal, your state, your local, and then says, oh, you all are spending enough. We're like a third of that basically, or a part of that. We're not the biggest, I think. But yeah, that's all state money. Quite literally, your money, your tax dollars right there.
Thanks, Che.
Thank you.
A quick
Melissa.
question. Yeah, this hi Che, I'm Melissa Goins, Family Resource Centers. I have conversations with districts every year on HIF forms, and so could you help me understand why we're still using paper and pencil?
Yeah.
To get information for such a huge, important, like you've emphasized the importance of this and the free lunch piece and all those. So go, I'm ready.
Yes. So the HIP form, the paper, we actually thought we figured out a way to get rid of that. And we were told if we could, they would put statues of us up in districts. We would be legendary. And I thought we figured out a way to get rid of them. And we did, but it didn't really go anywhere. One of the things that we do here is we talk a lot with the commissioner's office, and not just Fletcher, but Glass and Pruitt, all the way back Lewis, about how to effectuate good, positive change in this formula. We're not educators, we're finance people. We worry about cost. We worry about impact as well, though. Is it a good policy? We're not, I didn't come out of a teaching background, nor would I ever claim to be, but we do know that if, for example, the effort to collect these forms, is it really worth it when we could just pay for the whole thing? We agree.
It's not.
No, we agree fully. And we're still working towards that. And we hope through a SEEK reform package, which the commissioner keeps hinting at, which is his nice way of saying, Che, you need to figure this out in your free time, is to find ways to look at something like HIP. We know that form needs to go away. Yep. We know, and I've had finance officers call me and say, I've had to curse high school students all day who would not fill that out. It is a hassle for parents, for the school districts, and we were so excited because we thought we found a path, and it wouldn't have impacted everything, but it really would have been a big step.
If you need any help, if I can do anything to help you, I have specific interest in doing it, which we can talk about
It
offline.
seems like everybody wants it. It's just nobody knows how to actually get everything to happen.
I think you can do it. I think you can do it.
I'm pretty optimistic because when we figured out that we could really make a big positive change, we thought this will be the easiest thing to sell in the world. No one's going to argue with us, which doesn't happen very often. And we were like, this is great. And then we kind of got shot down because I think of some technical issues, but we'll continue to work on that. And our goal is always, kind of like Toyota, if you will, continuous improvement. Don't look at the formula as something that can't change. We've got great legislators that we work with, really good policy people, very smart analysts at the Legislative Research Commission. Everybody wants good things to happen with that formula. They understand it impacts so many of these kids. Mm-hmm. And, we want to leave something like when I got here, it was what it was, but when I leave, I want it to actually do what we want it to do instead of, it throws out money. We want it to hit the right kids at the right time so the school districts can educate those kids. That's a big deal to us.
Thank you, Melissa. That's a great question. Great comment. Anyone else? Che, I want to thank you for going through that. I just love that financial meatloaf and looking at all those separate pieces and just figuring out how it worked. And so I'd love to see you and Melissa do a little thinking together, and that would be
Yeah,
awesome.
for sure. And if you'll ever have any questions, and I will tell you, no joke, the Commissioner of Education has asked us to look at, possible reform items. This is a conversation that's going on for at least, 3 years, 2 years, something like that. It started during COVID, that they were getting pretty serious about it across the river. A lot of times it's, one step forward, 16 steps back. So we just kind of live with that, but there's a lot of great ideas out there. But one thing we're really trying to push is to break it up into segments. Tennessee did this. Other states have some really interesting models. Tennessee broke it up, brought in the experts that work in these fields every single day. For example, our Frisky coordinators. There's things that they see and do that we will never know about. So we would defer to them to say, give us ideas on what we need to fund. I've spoken to enough of them over the years to get a rough idea of, okay, these are things that they need in school districts to be successful. Your special ed directors know a million things more than I ever will, principals, et cetera. There's all these specialists that do this stuff every day that know it. And that's who we need to really learn from and say, this is what we do. Tennessee did it. Their model looks great. I think it's working pretty well, and it reaches the right people. That's the hard part, is saying, well, these are not just numbers. We're not to say $3.5 billion. Every bit of that's going into a school district and eventually impacting, students and stuff. So.
Well, thank you, Che. And there is Che's contact information if anyone has additional questions. And Che, we'd love to have you back in the future.
And to clarify, across the river is the General Assembly. It's behind my back here. That's why my blinds are closed, so they can't see that I'm in my office, and they won't call me today. So you all have a great day, and thank you for your time today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. And you can certainly leave us, and we so appreciate your time. Thanks, Che.
Thank you all.
Thanks. And I appreciate everyone. We are 2 minutes over, but I promise I will be brief on my portion of today's meeting. I just really want to round out an update on the 4 recommendations that this council has made. And you can find that document on the Family Partnership Council webpage to KDE. So without further ado, I'm going to jump on in here. The first recommendation, just to refresh all of our memories, is just to encourage districts and schools to develop local web pages that include more robust relationship building and communication metrics around meaningful family and community engagement. And we had we've talked about this today in terms of messaging with absenteeism. KDE hires a full service community schools manager, and that would be me. And then FPC will make recommendations to the local educational agencies and other state organizations on tools that support families and just navigating educational options and rights within the educational system. So we'll partner with KDE and other organizations to create an online, age-indexed, family-friendly guide that shares the most effective ways for schools to partner with families. As you know, number 2 has been accomplished. We are still working on 1 and 3. And number 4 is the FPC's work in this particular cycle is to assist the implementation of the previous 3 goals, and in particular, the adoption of the Kentucky Family and School Partnership Guide. So let me give you a quick update on our collection tool for success stories. And Amy, I'm so glad you shared one today. If you remember, I shared this last time to get your input. It has gone live. This is just simply about Family Partnership Council, the recommendations that we just reviewed, and that we are seeking stories. And so those quick questions that we have on this form, it's been in the Commissioner's Monday message for the past few weeks. I think it might already be on live another place. Let me just take that back. Let me check on that. So here's the quick questions, just identifiers like district name, school name, and then tell us about a promising or innovative practice that is going on. How has it impacted outcomes for students is question 4. How has it impacted outcomes for families is number 5. And then how has the community become more involved because of this practice? And then lastly, there is a place to share. What I want to share and get your input in and I'll make this brief. What ideas do you have as council members for sharing this form for greater input to get more success stories. We have received a few. And like Amy was sharing that story. And here's one thing I want to say, like if you could help spread that this tool is out there and that we are gathering these success stories. And some folks may think, you know, this really isn't a big deal. I'm sure everyone else is doing it. Just think about it is in the contextual form of you may think it's everyone else is doing it, but it might be exactly what the district or the neighbor school next to you really needs to implement or needs to hear to either emulate or just to serve as an inspiration to them, say, oh, well, we could do it this way to make it ours. So I just want to open this up for a few minutes for conversation. Do you have any ideas about sharing this form so that we have greater input from across the state?
Marcia, I just have a quick question about accessing the link to be able to
Okay.
share that, because we have groups that we work with. I work with an Elgin group here with about 100 school principals. And then we also have a school and district leadership group that can be shared with. So I think regionally I can share this if I have access to be able to put that link in prominent places and to maybe create a QR code for some of our sessions where that can
Love
be shared.
it. We have discussed, that's what I wanted to kind of back up a little bit. We have discussed putting this on the Family Partnership Council webpage as an active link because, like I said, it has been running in the Commissioner's Monday message. I don't think it was in there yesterday, if I remember correctly, but it has been for several weeks. So I love that idea and just the different audiences. I know the different groups I've been speaking to recently, I've been sharing it as well. I love that, Leah, and I'm going to get to work on that and I'll report back on that piece. In the meantime, we'll get the link I'll get the link to all of you. Leslie, will you help me with that as a follow-up for this meeting? We'll get the link to them.
Sure.
Thanks, Leah. Rhonda, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if you, sorry about in the chat, I was thinking about like social media and if there's a flyer that we could share with the link and some wording would be great.
We'll work on getting you some wording. Do you know that right now the link is designed to ask districts and schools and teachers, and I've shared it with all of them. I know we want to look forward to maybe get that input from community members and families, like what is really having an impact on them. So Leslie, if you'll record that idea, we'll come back and share some things on maybe some wording to go around it. You're welcome to use the wording that is in, let me show you that overview. There's a lot of pieces here, but we'll condense that down to a more user-friendly if that's what you're asking for. Okay. Thanks, Rhonda. Anyone else? So I'm making a note, Rhonda, so I don't lose it. So if any of you come up with any other ideas after we hang, and I know it's been we've been on here over 2 hours and there's been a lot of information, and I so appreciate you all staying so attentive and your questions have been just terrific in our conversation. I don't want to keep you much longer. But if you please, as you process everything that we've discussed today and everything that's been shared today, and if you think of something, there's my contact information. You can just shoot me an email and we'll get to work. And then I think Leslie and I have some follow-up chores to do. So I do want to thank all of you for coming today and just staying with us and staying attentive. I've already talked about that, but I just can't thank you enough again. It's been a rich conversation. So are there any last minute lingering thoughts or questions that you have on your mind before we adjourn? All right, our next meeting is coming up pretty soon. It is November the 6th. So we'll see you at November the 6th. And so may I have a motion to adjourn today's meeting? I think I see Rhonda's hand. I don't see the entire chat. Okay, Rhonda's made a motion. May I have a second? If you can come off mute, please.
I'll second. That's Leah.
Thanks, Leah. All in favor? If you raise your hand, we can see you. Okay. Anyone opposed? All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much.